Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. I'm Olga Hernandez, member and former president of the League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area. I will be your moderator this evening. Welcome to the 8th Congressional District Candidates Forum. The League of Women Voters is happy to have the following co-sponsors for this event: the American Association of University Women of Virginia, Fairfax County Council of PTAs, AARP Virginia, Voice of Vietnamese Americans, and Zeta Phi Beta Sorority, Inc. All of these are nonpartisan, nonprofit entities. LWVFA and the co-sponsors would like to thank the candidates for taking this opportunity to engage the voters of the 8th Congressional District. We send our appreciations to Jim Southworth, Director of Technology Development at Fairfax Public Access Television, for videotaping this event live at the FPA studio for the Inside Scoop television show, and for volunteering his time and expertise to upload the recording to YouTube. We want to thank all of the volunteers that helped organize this event, and we thank all of you, the audience, for viewing. We look forward to a lively, respectful discussion of the issues important to you, the voters. All candidates that have qualified for the November 8th ballot are participating in this event. In order to use time efficiently, the candidates should remain seated when speaking. Candidates are seated in alphabetical order. There will be a 2-minute opening statement by each candidate, followed by questions chosen from the studio and viewers. The questions will be picked at random. The order for the first question has been randomly selected. A 2-minute closing statement from each candidate will conclude the forum. Candidates will be introduced by the moderator and deliver their opening statements with 30 and 15-second warnings and a stop sign. Questions start after all the candidates have completed their introductory remarks, and they have 1 minute to answer the questions. Candidates will have Please hold all the applause to the end. Volunteers have provided index cards and pencils to the audience attending for writing questions. Questions germane to Congress may also be submitted by email or phone from the viewing audience using the information provided on the screen. Volunteers will collect the questions before presenting them to me. All questions should be brief and specific. Candidates have agreed to these rules. Now let's begin. And the first opening statement will be Mr. Charles Hernick.
Sure. Thank you, Olga, and thank you to all of you who are here live in the studio. Those of you who are watching on television or participating online, if you've got a window open on Twitter, I hope that you'll follow me at Charles Hernick. I got into this race for a very simple reason. It was a lot of conversations that I had with colleagues, coworkers, friends, people that I met all around the community that really kept coming back to the same basic issues. Folks expect more from Congress. We're in the slowest economic recovery since World War II. Truth be told, we're not safer here in the United States than we were 5 years or 10 years ago. This is actually the second candidate forum that we've had, and in the last candidate forum, Congressman Beyer referred to ISIS workers as if this is a job that you punch in and out for as an ISIS terrorist. And he equated ISIS with Al-Qaeda, and quite frankly, Al-Qaeda is still a problem and still a threat to the United States. We need to be doing more when it comes to federal employees. I got into this race focused on economic growth by focusing on improving conditions for small businesses, national security by focusing on our troops and veterans, and government efficiency by improving conditions for employees through information technology, through incentives for innovation. So if this is the first time that we're meeting, it's a pleasure for me to talk with you all. I look forward to a very cordial conversation here. I expect more from Congress. The status quo is not good enough. My name is Charles Hernick, and I look forward to all of the questions in English or in Espanol.
Yes, Mr. Beyer, you're next.
Good evening, I'm Don Beyer, and thank you so much for watching tonight. Growing up, I was taught that we were put on this earth to make a difference, to build something larger than ourselves, and to serve others. I first asked for your vote for Congress 2 years ago because I wanted to make a difference on the urgent issues of our time as well as the day-to-day problems facing constituents in Northern Virginia. I was honored to be elected to the 8th District. I love my new job. In the last 20 months, I've begun our efforts towards our collective goals. I ask for your vote again so I can continue this work. I've had three major priorities. The first is to work on many environmental issues, but especially climate change. I'm working hard for a carbon cap or a carbon fee that would return the revenues to every American, but allow us to do smarter renewable energy problems. I also speak out strongly on gun safety, and I've introduced two bills to try to bring some common sense to the gun violence that afflicts us all. And I'm dedicated to equality and civil rights for all, for greater economic empowerment for women, to a continuation of our great progress for equality for the LGBT community, and to comprehensive immigration reform. I have a proven record of public service, an openness to new ideas and voices from all communities. I'm principled, I always listen, I'll try my hardest, and I do what I believe to be best and honorable. And I'm a progressive in my values and my view of how Congress can and must make a difference in our lives and continue to shape our society and our future. I ask for your vote for November 8th. I look forward to a lively discussion tonight, and thank you so much for watching.
Next, Mr. Julio Garcia.
Gracia.
Gracia, sorry.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those words have evolved. They have evolved to mean that all Americans are created equal. They have evolved to mean that all Americans are to be treated equal. That evolution must continue. Our society must continue to evolve. And yet, many of our elected officials hesitate. And I think they hesitate because they have nothing personally at stake with the decisions they are making in Congress. For example, when they talk about cutting Medicare, it's because they did not rely on Medicare like my mother has. When they shut down the government, it's because they do not understand what public service really is about, like I have through 26 years as serving as a special agent of the FBI. When they let the metro deteriorate and break down and go into disrepair, it's because they didn't write it for 15 years like I did. My point is that many of the issues affecting all of you every day affect me too every day. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for Congress. My name is Julio Gracia. It is an honor to be here today. It would be an honor to serve all of you in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's the end of our opening statements. Now we go on to questions. Mr. Beyer, you first. This weekend, once again, terrorism has hit the U.S. soil. What measures do you support to strengthen our homeland security apparatus?
We've come a long way since 9/11, but we've never been immune from the lone wolf attack. So the first part is to attack the source of extremism as close as we can. And to that end, the administration has gone very hard after ISIS. We've already killed 20,000 ISIS workers. We've reduced their territory by almost 60%. I think there's great confidence in the military community that will continue to shrink and really destroy ISIS as a factor in world affairs. What we haven't been able to do are take the people that are basically brought to extremism in the United States, one person at a time, who do these lone wolf attacks. I think what we can do there is continue our outreach and make America as pluralistic and as safe as possible. By the way, very good information sharing with our partners around the world has also helped us uncover many, many plots which have never reached an explosion in Chelsea or a stabbing in Minnesota.
Thank you. Mr. Gracia.
Well, we'll do. One thing we need to continue to enhance is our human intelligence capabilities. We have the technology, no doubt about that, but we need to continue to enhance our human intelligence. And that happens both locally in the United States and with our allies overseas and every place overseas. Because as Mr. Beyer said, the lone wolf is a variable that's hard to contain. In a situation where these are terrorists that can grow overseas, that can grow here, it is very important that we have those intelligence capabilities, but we also have people talking to us. It's not enough just to listen for things out there. The other thing I would like to suggest, a way to combat it, is that many of these terrorist elements have a social media presence. And I want to use the analogy of Cuba. When we had Radio Marti, which was our system of providing information to the Cubans under Fidel Castro, we can use the same social media to put our perspective on life in order to inhibit the growth of terrorism abroad and here.
Thank you. Mr. Hernick?
Sure, thank you. There are two specific things that we need to be able to be better equipped and address threats to our national security. First, Congress needs to authorize the use of military force against radical Islamic terrorists. That's a very specific action item. The reason that that's important is it is the job of Congress, as written in the Constitution, to articulate who our enemies are abroad. Congress hasn't done that yet. I expect more from Congress. I expect them to do that. The reason that that's important is because it allows us, as the United States, to articulate who our enemies are. And part of the recruitment problem that we face, or part of the problem in terms of recruitment that ISIS is using to our advantage, is that they can articulate that all Muslims are under threat by the United States, which is not the case. I've worked abroad, I've worked in Muslim countries, and we have natural allies in those countries that can help us combat a common threat, which is radical Islamic terror, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and those are very specific things I'd like to work on.
Thank you very much. Mr. Beyer, the highway and railways infrastructure is crumbling. How would you fund repair or maintenance of roads and bridges?
Thank you, Olga, for that very much. But let me first, before answering that, just point out to my friend Charles, because I completely agree with him on the need for an authorization for the use of military force. My good friend, Senator Tim Kaine, has made that a centerpiece of his leadership the last year. But the problem is that this Republican Congress in which I serve will not bring a debate either in the House or the Senate on an AUMF. I will be very active in that engagement if we can ever get a floor debate. On infrastructure, we desperately need a new source of funding. The American Society of Engineers says we are $3 trillion behind in deferred maintenance on our bridges, 170,000 bridges, electrical grids, roads, everything around the country. We need a new source of revenue. The first thought is that we should do a gas tax. Many people think the gas tax won't work because more and more people are driving hybrids and electric cars. But if not a gas tax, then something perhaps like Oregon's doing, where you pay a fee based on vehicle mile traveled, a user fee. But we need something dramatic new that Democrats and Republicans can agree on.
Mr. Gracia.
Yeah, I understand there's a bond referendum that will help fund Metro. It's going to be on the ballot in November. This is a complicated issue in order to get funding. Let me try to concentrate here, which is...
We're talking about congressional action, not local.
Okay, very well. So what I'm getting at then is when it comes to, you've heard of the term inversion and corporations, and they hesitate to bring in their money that they have overseas back to the U.S. because the tax is so high. One way is by reducing their taxes on that. And by reducing their taxes, the plan would be they would bring their money back into the United States, and there would be a lesser tax, let's say 15%. That tax could be directed to our infrastructure boost in building our bridges, our railways, and that tax could be allocated just for that, and that would be a source of funding with tremendous benefits both locally and nationally.
Thank you. Mr. Hernick?
Sure, thank you. This is a critical question. It affects how all of us spend a meaningful part of our day, stuck in traffic sometimes. I believe that there are a couple of options that we need to look at, and very specifically, we need to create options. I think that public-private partnerships are a critical element that we need to be looking at when it comes to funding transportation. Certain amount of money can come from the federal government and come from taxes, but we know that the gas tax doesn't work in terms of it can't be increased, and Congress has failed to increase that tax for a long time. A carbon tax would be just as big of a failure. So we can look at public-private partnerships because it's in the private sector's interest if tolls can be established on certain roads to make an investment there because they might see a return on investment. What we're seeing right now in terms of autonomous vehicles is actually quite exciting, and I think there are a lot of private companies that would be willing to share some of the cost to insert chips, insert things that would improve the safety, accessibility, and speed up that development for autonomous vehicles.
Thank you very much. Mr. Beyer, there are more than 1 million caregivers in Virginia who provide more than $11.8 million worth of care to loved ones so they can remain in their homes. What would you do as a member of Congress to help family caregivers?
Well, thank you, Olga. This is something that affects almost every family right now as we get older and older. And one of the, I think, great unfairnesses in our society is that our caregivers are among the poorest paid. In fact, most of them are exempt from a $7.25 minimum wage, which, as we know, is way below the poverty level. So the first thing I do is make sure that every caregiver in Virginia is entitled at least to the minimum wage as is set federally. One of the other things I like to do culturally larger is we worry about so many jobs that have been eliminated by technology, farming, manufacturing, even technology workers. The one thing technology can't do is replace a caregiver, caring for somebody with Alzheimer's or a child. And so what we need to do, I think, is the larger cultural issue of committing much, much more of our resources for those who give care, because this is one of the jobs we're never going to do away with. It will grow and grow as our society changes.
Thank you. Mr. Gracia?
Hello, my mother has Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and one of my efforts, if elected, would be to have universal health care. That would be the fundamental thing that we would need in order to have a society that's stable and prosperous without spending thousands of dollars in wasted administrative costs that support nothing in the healthcare system. You see, because we do not have universal health care, that's why people have to stay home. That's why part of the day I stay home with my mom. That's why other people, like you stated, millions throughout America, have to stay home and are not even really paid for what they're doing. Universal health care would allow them to have long-term care, to have rehab care without having to worry. In other words, it would liberate ourselves and our society from an extreme burden.
Thank you. Hernick?
This is a great question and very timely, because we do need to be looking at options for younger folks that will be providing care for their parents. We're looking at a generation of baby boomers that are on the cusp of retirement, and more folks will be needing to provide care, whether it is a husband or a wife, a spouse that is responsible and needs more flexibility in the workplace. We can implement systems here in the federal government for greater flexibility. The problem is that IT infrastructure in the federal government is quite out of date in a lot of places. It inhibits workplace flexibility. That's something that I would like to focus on. The other option too is that we just need a more dynamic economy where folks have options for work that is commensurate with their ability to spend time out of the home in the workplace. But with technology, there's a lot of work that can be done at home, and that's something that we need to embrace and invest in.
Thank you. Mr. Gracia, you get the first one and this one. Do you support legislation to fix the Voting Rights Act following the Supreme Court decision in the Shelby case?
To fix the Voting Rights Act. In other words, to bring back the freedom of the voting. Yes.
Section that was disseminated by the Supreme Court.
Okay. Yes, without a doubt, we need anything that impairs our ability to vote by any segment of our population needs to be reverted back to its proper course, which means, why are we putting impediments to people to vote? There shouldn't be any impediments whatsoever. Yeah, if you have an ID, let it be any kind of ID that comes from a reliable source. If you have a college ID, that should be reliable. If you have a driver's license, of course, that's pretty reliable. A passport, anything that can identify you. But the thing is, we have to make it easy to vote. That's the whole idea. Otherwise, it's not really democracy. It's a selected democracy, and that's not true democracy. So, in other words, let's just have as much freedom to vote as possible.
Thank you. Mr. Hernick?
I wholeheartedly agree. The right to vote is something that we need to protect for U.S. citizens. It's the right of a U.S. citizen to vote. Right now, Alexandria is looking at a terrible lawsuit where there's questions of voter fraud in terms of over-registration of potential illegal aliens. It's our privilege as an American citizen, as a United States citizen, to have the right to vote. And I agree that there should be some flexibility in terms of what kind of identifications people can use for that. I'm also a supporter of same-day voter registration. The truth is that we need to be able to get people accessible to the ballot. The only people that think about elections months and months ahead of time are politicians, the three guys sitting at the table here. You know, most people think about voter registration at the last minute and only upon great encouragement, and I encourage everyone to register to vote here in Virginia. The deadline is coming up, I think, October 15th? 17th. I stand corrected.
You get the next question first.
Did you? Do I get a chance to answer that question? Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, first of all, I agree with Charles very much on same-day voter registration. It would be a wonderful thing to have in Virginia. We're moving it slowly down from 30 days, but we're far from where we should be. And I'm so glad that the Supreme Court threw out the case in North Carolina, the law in Texas, that was really restricting. Statistics showed up to 2% of people were being turned away because they didn't have the right registration. But Olga, I think your question was about the Voting Rights Act as it affected southern states. And that was what the case was about, and it pulled out that whole section.
Legislation that is currently will cover all states. There's a legislation to bring back that section.
Exactly, and it's interesting, but the legislation as it was only covers southern states, right. And Virginia was one of them. So for years and years, we had to go through that. I thought Bobby Scott, congressman who served for many, many years, had a better idea, which was any state that violated the Voting Rights Act in a significant way would be subject to the new Voting Rights Act on an indeterminate basis. So.
Okay. Thank you. You get the next question. Sure. Should Congress raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour? Why or why not?
I would support an immediate federal minimum wage increase to $10 an hour. $15 is a lot of an increase, and it certainly matters over what period of time. So it's a conversation I'm open to, but the minimum wage question is a very sticky issue. We know what it costs for a meal here in Fairfax County. It's a little bit less than it costs in Arlington County. It's a little bit less there than it costs in Washington, D.C. A dollar buys you something very different than it does in Washington, D.C., than it does in rural Minnesota or Wisconsin or Texas. And we need to be very cognizant of the fact that a federal mandate of that level has a very big impact on a lot of different wage earners. And I think it's an important conversation that we should have. I disagree completely with the idea that a minimum wage needs to be a livable wage for people, because the truth is it should set the floor. I've worked many minimum wage jobs in my lifetime. Fortunately, it hasn't been too recently. Thank you. But it's something we can talk about more. Bye.
I wish we had more Republicans in Congress right now, like Charles, that would agree with us that we should go right to $10. The $15, first of all, I think we should go to $10.25 immediately. And with some more Republican votes, we could do that. But I look at the cities around the country, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Missoula, Montana, Seattle, Washington, D.C. now, that are at $15, and they're all thriving. There was a wonderful editorial cartoon in the Post a couple of weeks ago that showed through the years all the people that were like singing the end of the world because the minimum wage was going to go to $2 and $3 and $5. In each case, the economy has risen up because of that. So I'm co-sponsor of legislation with Congressman Bobby Scott that would take it to $15 by 2020. So you move it up little by little by little. And even that may not be a livable wage then. But I think, as President Obama said again and again, it's sin to have people work full time and not be able to at least live and pay the rent and be at the poverty level.
Mr. Gracia.
As Mr. Beyer said, the raise up to $15 gradually over the next perhaps 3 years to raise it to that level, certainly I would support that. And I think it should be also part of a whole look at our taxation system, in which the minimum wage that we have would yield to a minimum yearly wage. And at that point, that minimum yearly wage, you wouldn't be taxed on whatsoever. And after that, you can contribute to your retirement, you can contribute to health care, and then you start contributing to the federal government, to the state government. Then you pay taxes after you've taken care of yourself. So I think it should be an inclusive program, a comprehensive program, where we have a raise in the minimum wage, but we also protect your wages. And I think we can do that as a minimum yearly wage.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, what federal legislation, if any, would you support to reduce gun violence?
Olga, I believe I am co-sponsoring about half a dozen bills on it right now. The first two that are most meaningful are making sure that people that are on the terrorist background list, which, by the way, aren't randomly put on there, as Julio knows from his work with the FBI, these are people that have been thoroughly vetted as a danger to the United States, and we don't let them know that they're on the terrorist background list. It wouldn't do any good to follow them around and see who their friends were. They shouldn't be able to buy a gun if we won't even let them fly. It's the old no fly, no buy. The second thing we do is do universal background checks. Some say up to 40% of the weapons purchased in America every year are purchased privately through the internet or a gun show, so there's no background check. We see cases of crimes again and again where someone bought a gun that shouldn't have been able to, wouldn't have been able to buy it legally at a gun shop, but buys it off the background check list. Those are two places to start. I also am lead sponsor of a bill to bulk up the ATF, the Arms and Tobacco and Firearms. We say keep guns out of the hands of criminals and the dangerously ill. Let's give the ATF the money to do it.
Thank you.
Yes, I think, you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think both parties, not on this dais, but both parties throughout the country exploit the issue, and they do it in the wrong way. The first thing I would like to do is repeal the Dickey Amendment. And for those of you who know and don't know, the Dickey Amendment forbids the CDC to study the issue of gun violence. We study so many other forms of violence, but we cannot study, the federal government cannot study through the CDC, gun violence. We need to repeal that law. In fact, the people who brought the law to Congress, Mr. Dickey, he's in favor of repealing it too. And that is really ironic. We need to study that issue, and then from there, reinforce the laws that we have. From there, create laws where there are loopholes, and solve the issue that way.
Thank you. Mr. Hernick?
This is an important question. First of all, there is no acceptable level of gun violence, period. The good news is that we are on a trajectory where we're at the lowest level in recorded history of gun violence in the United States. What is left is egregious and problematic and dangerous. We need to keep our neighborhoods safe. There's a difference between putting forward legislation as Congressman Beyer has and passing it. The problem with some of Congressman Beyer's proposals are that they are not constitutional and they violate basic due process under law. If I am put on a list and some government official believes that I am not fit to have a gun, I should know about it. That's due process. Our rights can be taken away from us. Your gun right can be taken away from you. Your voting right can be taken away from you by a judge in a courtroom. And that's fundamental that we stick with that. I also disagree with Congressman Beyer's proposal to remove Senate confirmation from the ATF director. I don't understand why we would try to weaken the legislative branch of the United States.
Thank you. Mr. Gracia? In 2015, U.S. women working full-time year-round were paid just 80% of U.S. men's median earnings, a gap of 20%. Do you support passing the Paycheck Fairness Act?
I do. Fortunately that we have to even discuss that today because it makes no sense. It's an issue about fairness, equity, justice. Fortunately, I worked in the federal government for 26 years. Everyone gets paid the same according to that GS scale. So the issue in the federal government wasn't so much about the pay, it was about opportunity. And that's still an issue in our country. So we have in our country two issues. The issue about fair opportunity for women and also fair pay for women doing the job that men are doing. And definitely, if that's the only way, and I wish there were other ways, if that were the only way to really move this forward, then I would support it, of course.
I support any legislation that guarantees that women get paid the same as men for equal work, period. It's that simple. I'm proud that I have advocated very fiercely for equal pay for the women that I manage. And it's not always easy. There's a lot of responsibility that falls on an individual manager to ensure that that is done. So I definitely support legislation. Part of it has to do with enforceability. We need to have the mechanisms that are in place that, number one, don't produce too much of a burden on small businesses to do reporting. But we need to take advantage of information that hasn't been previously accessible. Like websites like Glassdoor allow a great degree of transparency and accountability for employers, and I think that that's a fantastic thing where men, women can report on what they're getting paid, men, women can report on whether or not they are promoted and treated fairly in an annual evaluation process. So I think legislation, of course, but there's a tremendous amount of personal responsibility that goes along with that.
Mr. Beyer?
strongly support the Paycheck Fairness Act, and I've been part of this for a long time and have, through my 40-some-year business career, tried to make sure that there are many women at the top of our organizations. I'm pleased that my chief of staff, my political director, my CFO, and many others are women right now, often the highest paid people in the organization. I want to respond to Charles's comment, though. There are many constitutional scholars that don't think no fly, no buy is unconstitutional. In fact, if that's unconstitutional, so are background checks, so are the many gun laws we already have on the books. Let me also point out that it may be on a per capita basis, I've never heard this before, that our gun violence is going down, but we just killed 32,292 people in America last year. In actual numbers of American citizens, it's going up and up and up. And in fact, if we just take that the average American lives 80 years, that's 2.5 million Americans will be killed by guns in the course of our average lifetime. By the way, we did ATF director because with the Republican Congress that passed that, they've only confirmed one ATF director in the last 12 years. We need to have appointed by the Attorney General so we actually get an ATF director.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Hernick. No, Mr. Gracia. It seems nothing gets done in Washington until the last minute. Will we have to wait until Social Security cannot pay its bills before something gets done? How will you, as a member of Congress, show your leadership by making this a priority?
Yes, Social Security, there are two funds in Social Security, the Disability Fund and the Retirement Fund. They will run out of money. Well, first of all, we'll start taking out more money in 2019 than is coming in. Then it's going to go completely empty in 2034, and by 2040, you'll only have two workers working for each retiree. Now, the thing is, I want to restructure the tax system so that money can be released for Social Security and also more for your own personal retirement. Because Social Security is something that will be limited by our population. It won't be enough. I will support legislation and look at creative ways to support Social Security, but the problem is, because the number of workers versus the number of retirees are going by 2040 will be 2 to 1, we have to look at other ways of bolstering people's retirement, their funding for retirement.
Thank you.
Thanks. This is a critically important question, especially for a generation of folks that include myself, millennials. I'm in the workforce. I pay for Social Security. I think that if you ask anyone, if you look on the couch next to you, if you look in the room around you, and look at anyone under the age of 30 and ask them what they think about Social Security, they're going to laugh. It's a joke. We know that Social Security will be insolvent. We need to do everything that we can to make sure that Social Security is solvent for folks that are over 40 years. You paid into a system, you deserve to get what you paid into. For folks that are younger, we need to be honest and calibrate expectations. We need to raise the retirement age and have that change over time. We need to create incentives so that folks have options for additional retirement savings, things like an additional IRA. There are a lot of government structures that can be established to help with this, and I look forward to having a real discussion about it.
Thank you. Yeah. Go.
Thank you. I'm worried about Charles and the other millennials. 3 of my 4 kids are millennials, and they too, they don't laugh, they cry about what they expect with Social Security. And there are good discussions out there. I am co-sponsored with John Larson of Connecticut on the so-called Social Security 2100 bill that does in fact make it solvent right through the year 2100, takes away all the millennials' angst. And it does it with a number of tweaks, including gradually increasing the payroll tax from 6.2 by 0.05% per year, and putting the taking the cap off beyond $450,000 of income. And I used to be for raising the retirement age until I looked at many of the people who work in our family business, the mechanics who are lifting transmissions and pulling engines out, and they are worn out often by the age of 60. And it's not fair. Maybe for a knowledge worker, a lawyer or accountant to work till 67, 68, 69, but for many of the people doing the hard physical work in America, the 65 makes sense.
Mr. Garcia?
Can I answer that question? Okay. Our next one. Yeah.
Next one. How would you grow the U.S. economy to restore the vibrancy of the middle class?
Okay. Once again, tax restructuring. because the tax rate of most corporations is at least as stated, is 35%. Of course, that is the statutory rate, and the actual reality rate is what I would call it, ends up being significantly less. However, we're talking about big corporations where they're able to reduce their rate because they have the support of their resources to look for loopholes, to look for a way of investing, sending money overseas. However, small businesses, that's what we have to emphasize. Small businesses are chambers of innovation, of new jobs. They grow to become big corporations. Apple was once a small company, and so was the Gap. Now there may be too many Gaps. But the thing is, we have to encourage growth, and we can do that by reducing the tax burden and simplifying the tax system so that people understand how to pay it properly.
Mr. Hernick?
Sure. This is top issue number one for me. America is a country of innovators. The folks that come here as first-generation immigrants come here oftentimes because they're interested in economic freedom, the marketplace opportunities that exist here, and that's something that we know very well here in Fairfax County. Looking around at who owns and runs businesses, it's very diverse. I'm proud of that. We need to double down on that and create the right conditions for small businesses. If you've met me in person, you've seen my little note card, and top on it is focused on improving conditions for small businesses. We can do that by simplifying taxes for small businesses in terms of how they're reporting, whether as a corporation or under an individual. We can also look at how to establish fair regulations for individuals so that regulatory agencies, people here in the federal government can focus on how to create an environment that is conducive so that more small businesses open up instead of close. We need to reverse the trend that's been taking place over the last 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Beyer.
Well, first of all, let's celebrate the good parts. We've had more than 70 straight months of job growth, the longest in American history. Our unemployment rate is 4.8, 4.9%. It's 3.7 in Virginia, the lowest in the South. And we just had a 5.2% increase in middle income wages, the highest annual jump in American history. But our growth is too slow. We're 1.5 to 2%. It's not the 4% we want. Let's do 4 things. Number 1, a major infrastructure bill. Let's spend the next $170 billion a year. Number 2, let's get rid of college debt. Because these kids come out owing $500, $600 a month. They can't be the entrepreneurs that we want to have. They can't start the new businesses. Number 3, let's do immigration reform. We have 12 million Americans living in the shadows that can be major contributors to economic growth. And number 4, let's pass the trade agreements. The Trans-Pacific Partnership with 12 countries in Asia, the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with Europe. This will explode our markets and lead to much more job growth.
Okay. Do you wanna? Okay. You get the next one.
Sure.
What improvements do you support to ensure that the affordable health insurance for all, especially in light of some of the health insurance companies pulling out of the Affordable Care Act?
The Affordable Care Act is in trouble. It has done a good job of increasing a number of folks who have insurance coverage, but it's done so at great expense for individuals in terms of the money that's coming out of their personal pockets. It's forced a lot of employers to reduce the number of employees that they have or not hire. This is problematic. I think that we need to drop the mandate that corporations provide insurance, keep that mandate on the individual. The specific thing that we need to do is that there were a lot of extra riders that came in with the Affordable Care Act in terms of minimum insurance requirements. Now, some of those requirements are good, but the truth is that you should get insurance that's commensurate with your health risk. Folks that are young and playing football don't need ambulatory care. If someone breaks their leg on the football field, they get thrown into their buddy's back seat and they get hauled off to the hospital as fast as possible. Ambulatory care is expensive and an important driver of health insurance, and it's one of the things that we need to look at.
Mr. Beyer.
I'm so proud of the 20 million people that are covered. Charles made the point that the premium's been going up for the rest of us. Let me tell you, before the Affordable Care Act, they were going up very strongly for the rest of us too. They haven't gone up any faster since the Affordable Care Act. And what's happening is now people with pre-existing conditions are covered. That's an incredibly important thing for the anxiety and the security of many American families. Do I pay a higher premium than many of the folks who work with me? Yes. But just take one more thing. Contraceptives now are free with no deductible. And once again, unintended pregnancies are way down, abortions are way down, something we can all agree on. One of the things we have not done in Virginia is extend Medicaid, which was a thought. Those states that have done that have found that the premiums have gone down because the risk pool is all of a sudden so much bigger. If we expanded Medicaid in Virginia, 400,000 more people, and for the people that weren't on Medicaid, the middle class, the upper middle class, their premiums would actually come down. One of the big challenges is the young people didn't sign up, and that may happen next year.
Mr. Gracia?
Yes, as you heard, I advocate for universal health care. Obamacare, definitely a noble effort. It got 20 million people on insurance. There are still 30 million people without an insurance. And many of the people who have insurance are underinsured. Personal bankruptcy, the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States are health care costs. And the majority of those people who declare bankruptcy because of those reasons actually do have some form of insurance. In our great nation, this cannot continue. The way to control all of this, single payer, universal health care. $400 billion is wasted in administrative costs. You tell me we cannot use those $400 billion to insure all of us and insure us all well.
Thank you. And now we go to, is it reasonable to make college affordable or free for all? Right?
Yes, I think it is reasonable. You know, at some point there probably people thought it wasn't reasonable to make high school free or K through 6 free. It's been fascinating that in Memphis, Tennessee, a Republican mayor opened it up for free community college, 13th and 14th grade. It worked so well that the Republican governor of Tennessee made it for the whole state and really is a role model for the rest of the country. President Obama has adopted this as a mission, as has Tim Kaine and Mark Warner. Yes, you may have to phase it in little by little, but we look at the gap. We have more jobs available in America than any time in our history, and yet we also know that we have more than 10 million people that are unemployed or underemployed. The big problem is the jobs that are available don't match the people that need those jobs. And most of them don't need 4-year college educations, but they do need the 2-year technical degrees from community colleges and the like that will help them take the IT jobs, the manufacturing jobs, and others that people need.
I wish there was a way to make it completely free, but all the proposals I've seen so far pushes a lot of the burden onto the states. And the states actually have declined in the amount they give to our state universities. So now that means that the individual, the parents, the child who goes to school has to take up more of the burden. But let's understand what the problem is. The average student, undergrad, has $17,000 in debt. I want to differentiate between undergrad and going to law school and going to medical school where your debt is $50,000, could be $100,000. Let us focus on the $17,000 of debt for undergrads. And what we should be doing, and instead of federal government supporting all these loans and finding ways to alleviate the loan structure, to forgive the loan, let's not give out loans anyway. But we need to connect these to your grades because the graduation rates are very low for a community college. No.
I do not at all support free college supported at the federal level. To me, that's absolute nonsense and kind of a crazy idea. It says nowhere in the Constitution anything about free college. We know one thing for sure. The federal government does actually a bad job when it comes to implementing and raising standards when it comes to education. Common Core, which was an effort to increase standards through more testing and bring the whole country in one direction, failed on a bipartisan basis. The federal government should stick to what it's good at and should have a very limited role. States can have wide latitude to do what they want. But education, I think, is a local issue and something that should be invested in at a local issue. At a personal level, I was very lucky that my parents set aside some money to help me reduce the cost of college. But I paid for a lot of it myself. A lot of folks worked really hard to put themselves through school, and it's not a handout, it's not a free thing.
Thank you. You're next. Do you believe that there are any issues that can get bipartisan support in Congress today? If yes, name one.
This is a good question, and this is where, if there was something that could get bipartisan issue, I think that what we need to do, two things that I think that we could pass, we should be able to pass relatively quickly, and this should be a voting issue for everybody. We need to ensure that Congress passes budgets on time. And Congress should propose legislation, and if I was in Congress, I would propose legislation that says that I don't get a paycheck unless we pass our budget with enough time so that the executive branch can do their job properly. Otherwise, we shouldn't get reelected. That's very simple. There should be a tie between Congress doing its job, which is to, Congress has the power of the purse, and it should be able to do that effectively. Otherwise, you should be firing your current congressmen or women. And we need to get back to that. Another thing that I would like to talk about in terms of legislation that we could pass has to do with climate change. I believe that climate change is real and that there's a free market solution to it. I would like to look at better market integration between renewable energy credits and carbon credits.
With respect to my friend Mr. Hernick, he's looking at a different Congress than I am looking at. We haven't had a budget in years and years and years. I'd love to vote for a budget, but no one would ever come out of the Republican Budget Committee. Similarly, I would love to have a bipartisan consensus on climate change. Maybe we can work together on it. But I serve on the Science Committee, where the Republicans on the Science Committee believe the world is getting colder. They put people on the committee that are actually think that this is a hoax. There are things that we can do bipartisan. Criminal justice reform is one. Bob Goodlatte, the Republican chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and John Conyers, the senior member, Democrat, have worked out 6 different bills to get rid of mandatory minimums for nonviolent crimes, change a lot of drug crimes. Hopefully they'll pass this year. Another thing we can get bipartisan work on is infrastructure. We all, Democrats and Republicans, realize we have underinvested in our country. We just have to find a revenue source that we can agree on. That's the harder part.
Thank you. Mr. Gracia?
I think the time is now for major, comprehensive tax reform, and I think both parties are amenable to that. We can do it in 2 parts. One, your personal taxes. Why? Because that way people will have more money to consume. It's consumer side economics. We want people to purchase things, to have that vitality to go to the store and buy what they need. That is, we restructure the personal taxes to make it simple. You should feel happy paying your taxes. The other side is, and I think Congress is ready for that, lower the corporate tax, because all the studies show that if we lower the corporate tax, there will be more job creation. There will be higher wages. Corporations will bring back the money they have from overseas, and we can then tax that money, which we can't tax right now, for such things as the burst of infrastructure construction.
Go with you for this one. What is your assessment of sequestration, and what can be done so that our budgeting process does not result in future sequestrations? Again, yes. More budget.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I'm running is because they shut down the government a few years ago, and I felt that was stupid. Sequestration is stupid. It makes no sense to tie the hands of the government to not able to move money around when it needs to for its priorities and all that without going through a whole bunch of emergency kind of bills and stuff like that. It's stupid. It's leadership by abandonment. What we have to do is repeal all that and create a system where we can look at the budget and say this portion, hey, this portion is invalid for our purposes. No more pork, no more of these, like there's actually, there was actually a project that spent $1 billion, or no, it was part of a $1 billion project that included elephants trying to find bombs on the street. Okay? I do not know the purpose of that, but you can imagine how they tested that with the elephants. So in any case, there is a lot of waste, and we should be able to go line by line and say to the budget, hey, this is no good. This is not acceptable.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hernick?
Yeah, you fired the guys that couldn't pass budgets in time. You need to hold Congress accountable and hold folks to a higher expectation. That's the reason that I'm running. We need to fast track that. It affects a tremendous amount of voters here in this district. We need congressional leadership. We need a leader in Congress who can work towards solutions and pass those budgets. It affects our congressional district, the 8th congressional district, perhaps more than any other district in the country because of the number of federal employees that we have. Sequestration hit my neighborhood hard. I live in Pentagon City, and it affected a lot of folks out here in the Fairfax area too. So we need to make sure that we're focused on budgetary compromise so that folks can continue to do their jobs, so that folks can make IT infrastructure investments and in the federal workplace on time, and so that we can have that dream of accountable, responsive, limited government with budget certainty.
Thank you, Mr. Beyer. You get the last shot here.
Well, we need to get rid of the Budget Control Act. You know, sequestration was put there as the tool that no one thought we would ever use. It was so dramatic, and it did kill us along with the shutdown, and it killed lots of our local businesses. I can swear to that. And we need to get rid of it. So let's think structurally. I think there's a wonderful plan laid out by the Committee to Fix the Debt, Senator Judd Gregg, among others, who said, let's totally reform the budget process. First, let's make sure that every budget committee, House and Senate, is 50% Democrat and 50% Republican, no matter who's in charge. Because right now, they're totally partisan budgets. And if we're going to fix the budget long term, it's going to have to be together. Second, let's put appropriators and revenue raisers on it too, because they're different. And we're going to hurry up. So we're going to do the bigger process.
We're going to start with closing statements. Mr. Hernick.
Sure. Thank you very much for your time and attention this evening, for participating here in the room, if you're watching on television or participating online. I'm running for Congress because I want to represent the people that I encounter in this district. These are the small business owners. These are the folks that work for a living, want economic opportunity, they want their small businesses to succeed. They're not looking for free government handouts when it comes to free tuition or free whatever. These are the hardworking federal employees that need a workplace that is responsive to their needs and allows them to be responsive to their customers. I expect more from Congress. I got into this because I believe that we can do more with the taxes that we have. We can be more efficient with the taxes that we have. If you heard Congressman Beyer, over and over again, I heard raise the gas tax, raise the Social Security tax, raise taxes. And here in Fairfax County, you all are looking at a meals tax. This is a local issue on the ballot. It will increase the cost of food. I can't imagine that folks can pay more in taxes. I certainly can't. And the people that I talk to, the hardworking folks, can't either. So I've been very excited to meet a lot of people over the course of this run, and it is what got me into this, is so that I could focus on economic growth through small businesses, national security by supporting our troops and our veterans. It breaks my heart when I hear stories about troops that feel like they weren't well equipped, or they didn't have a clear assignment, they didn't have a clear mission. It's the job of Congress to provide that leadership. I would love to provide that leadership if I'm elected in November. There's also more that we can do for federal employees. We have so many federal employees here in the area. I would love to represent you all. I've worked with many of you as clients and coworkers, but we have a huge opportunity ahead of us. Sure, there are challenges. Congressman Beyer has stated some of those issues, but expect more from Congress, expect more from your representative, expect to get things done. I ask for your vote in November. I hope that you'll check me out on Facebook or on Twitter and follow the campaign. Thank you.
Mr. Beyer.
Thank you to the Fairfax League of Women Voters for this evening's forum. Thanks for all for coming. Thank you for watching. And thanks to my opponent, to Julio, Gracia, to Charles Hernick, for your interest and your commitment to public service and for this debate. So I'm very grateful. And as your congressman, I take seriously my responsibility to serve you, to listen to you, to work on Capitol Hill and here in Northern Virginia to bring progress, equality, and the best possible economic conditions for businesses and families alike. I think I've accomplished a lot in my first 20 months. I do expect more of myself every single day. I've pushed for an increase in the minimum wage, for paid family and medical leave, and for numerous initiatives to enhance women's economic positions. I've been an outspoken voice for religious tolerance and for compassionate immigration policies. I'm a leading voice in the House for environmental causes, endangered species, protection of federal lands, our National Park Service, and especially policies to combat climate change. I'm doing all I can to oppose the NRA's ridiculous extremism on guns, and I want to make our society safer and wiser when it comes to guns. A top priority to me is our many federal employees. We have more federal employees in the 8th District of Virginia than any congressional district, and more federal contract employees. These are the backbone of the district, and improvements in their treatment and the policies affect them all. I'm the most experienced candidate in this race.
We're getting a little short of time, and we want to give everybody a little bit of time. Sorry, it's just the way the clock runs.
Thank you.
Mr. Gracia?
Hi. This has been like speed dating to be able to answer every question. This must be like speed dating. So in other words, for those of you who have gun owners, I'm a gun owner. No one's coming to take your guns. Second Amendment is safe, but we need to study the issue. As far as college tuition, remember, $17,000 for undergrads. We need to connect that to graduation rates. We need to graduate to perhaps the grade point average, because under 2-year colleges, the graduation rate is 39%, 4-year colleges is 59%. If we're going to make this investment, let's make sure it is truly an investment in our society. I do want universal health care. I was for 26 years a federal employee, so no issue there. You know I'm going to represent you well. And as far as retirement, we have to look at other systems to bolster people's retirement. And for example, I would like for all of you to go home and take $10,000 and invest it over 65 years. We may have to reach the point, because of Social Security running out and the number of workers per retiree going to 2 to 1, we have to find other systems. One system is, when you become an American, you get $10,000 that you'll pay back when you retire, but you earn interest. It's very similar to the TSP. That alone will give you like $60,000, which is the average that the median, not the average, the median that an American has at retirement. $60,000, okay, more or less. Now, if you were able to invest $100 every month for those 65 years, you would have over 300 grand, okay? So we have to be creative. I'm not saying this has to be the only way, but we need to be creative so that people are able to retire with dignity and to enjoy their retirement. And thank you very much. It's been an honor to be here. Go to my website, Gracia #4 Congress, Gracia for Congress. Thank you so much.
And thank the candidates for participating. This concludes the 8th Congressional District Forum, and thank you all. The deadline to register or make changes to your registration in Virginia is October 17th. Go online to vote.virginia.gov to check your status today or for steps to request an absentee ballot. Remind your friends and family to do so. Thank you on behalf of all the co-sponsors and the League of Women Voters. Good night.